All right. Hello and welcome everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you may be located right now. So, my name is Jakob Freund. I'm CEO of Camunda, and I'd like to give you a quick overview about Camunda BPM today. So the agenda that I've prepared is quite simple, actually. First of all, I will provide a quick overview about the company. So I want to tell you about Camunda as a software vendor. That should be a very quick overview. And after that, I will tell you, this is the lion's share, of course, of this presentation about the Camunda BPM product. This will, of course, also include a live demo. Right after that, I will talk a bit about our customers, and I've also prepared a few case studies to discuss and potential next steps, what you can do if you actually want to look at Camunda BPM in detail. And at the end of this webinar, which should take about an hour, we will have enough time to answer any questions that you might have. So if you want to know anything about Camunda, I would ask you to just enter your questions in the chat window on the left-hand side, so I can then cover those questions at the end of the session. Okay, so let's talk about the company first. Camunda was founded by Bernd Rücker and myself about 7 years ago now, here in Berlin, in Germany. Now in 2014, we also incorporated a subsidiary in San Francisco, California, because we have more and more customers from the United States. So therefore, it makes sense to set up a presence there. But we started here in Berlin, Germany, and we started as a pure BPM consulting provider. So BPM stands for Business Process Management, obviously. And Bernd, my co-founder, and me were already quite into this discipline before we even started Camunda. So we wanted to provide best practices, consulting, training, etc. around BPM. And we did that for about 4 years. And within those 4 years, we learned, as you can imagine, a lot about BPM on a business level, example given about process mapping, documentation, improvement, as well as on the technical level in terms of process automation. And as you can imagine, we've also seen a lot of different BPM products. And after those 4 years, we figured out that those existing BPM products were not really suited for a certain segment within the market, which I will just explain in a couple of minutes. So in 2012, we created and started to offer our own BPM software product, and that went extremely well. So well that nowadays we consider ourselves mostly a BPM software vendor. So we still do consulting, of course, but our core business is about the BPM product that I'm going to demonstrate today. Looking at the staff, we have about 30 full-time employees, and we grow organically. So this means we never had to raise any external funding. So there's no venture capital investor driving us mad with their ROI expectations or things like that. So we are actually able to pursue our vision of a better way of BPM in a quite sustainable way. By doing that, we grow by more or less 50% turnover per year. So this means that we're growing ambitiously, but sustainable. Right, so much about the company already. So let's have a look at Camunda BPM. So I would like to start by explaining the problems that actually motivated us to create something like Camunda. And I've prepared a little table because of this. So you can also find this table in a white paper that you can actually download on network.camunda.org that explains the possible alternatives to Camunda BPM in detail and looks at them. So let's have a look on the left-hand side on the first column, which symbolizes or reflects the first possible alternative you have when looking at your business processes, which is not automating them at all. So this means that you would actually work manually within your business processes, which of course leads to certain costs. It slows things down. It's error prone, so you may have issues with your quality of your results. It's not really transparent. You don't really know what's going on, and it's not really agile in terms of that it's easy to make changes. So this is what everyone knows basically. So this is why people started actually, automating their business processes, and most of them did like in the last decades by just implementing them more or less directly with the already existing software engineers they had at hand. So they just programmed basically their business processes in their preferred programming language, such as .NET or Java or COBOL even, or other languages. And of course, in a way, this solves the problems of manual work in a way. But on the other hand, it's also also actually difficult because first of all, you don't have real process transparency if you do it that way, because the truth is in the source code, as I like to say, which means it's all in lines of code what's actually happening in your processes. You don't have any visual representation. You don't really know what's going on, even if you have documented the process. This may be outdated or things like that. Also, it's quite difficult to change your business processes because it's always a project of development, basically. And third aspect, and this may be the even most important aspect, is you wouldn't implement your own database, right? So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to reinvent the wheel and implement your own process engine. There are certain challenges around process automation on an engineering level that others already have solved. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to do that all on your own with your own programmers. So though this, of course, are like valid concerns about self-programmed processes, there's also the other extreme, which is also problematic in a way. Is what I mean is when your mostly management actually decides to just buy something out of the box. So there are, of course, lots of different business applications available in the market that are about, like, for instance, CRM or ERP or any other kind of domain-specific business applications. And quite often you get some workflow functionality already embedded within those applications. However, downside is, besides the fact that those workflow functionalities are often not that powerful, is that it's really difficult to actually tailor those business processes that are executed or implemented within those applications to your individual company-specific business model, which is of course very individual, since it's, as I said, like your core business. So you will get something like like a one-size-fits-all product that will most certainly not fit your individual requirements or not meet them. Plus, it's quite difficult to embed those products seamlessly in your IT infrastructure. And you also have the risk of a vendor lock-in, because what the vendors often say when you confront them with that fact that the already existing built-in workflows don't meet your process reality. They often say, well, we can customize. Of course, that's true to a certain extent, which is limited, obviously. Plus, it also brings the risk of being dependent from the vendor whenever you want to change those implemented workflows or processes within those applications. So, those out-of-the-box applications may be okay for certain support functionalities or processes, but if it's about your very core business, it's probably not a good idea to just buy something off the shelf, obviously. So this is one of the reasons why those traditional, as we call them, BPM suites came up in the last decade. And at first glance, they look quite promising, because they allow you to create business process models in a drag-and-drop way, and allow you to automate them on an individual level. However, the big problem, and that's what we have experienced again and again as consultants, is that in the last decade, there was that movement about model-driven development. And I think it was a bit overcompensation what we saw happening back then, because of course it makes sense to model your business process, and it also makes sense to directly execute those models. However, it doesn't make too much sense to also model your user interface, your data, your interfaces, or API calls. When you actually start modeling all that, it becomes extremely complex. It's very difficult to actually model it in a way that is tailored to your needs. And of course, you need vendor-specific know-how. This is not about typical software development anymore. I mean, remember, we have, for instance, 10 million Java developers out there. This is about being able to handle that specific product from that specific vendor. And this also, of course, brings additional vendor lock-in. So actually, those traditional BPM suites seem to have a stuck-in-the-middle problem. They're not really out of the box, like the business applications, but they're also not flexible enough to being able to reflect your individual core business processes. Plus, they lock you in. So this is why we created Camunda BPM as a solution, as a better compromise, as a better compromise between an internally developed process application and something that you get out of the box in order to not reinvent the wheel. Right, so what is Camunda all about? It's first of all about standards. So we have a standard called BPMN from an organization called OMG. It's the standard for business process modeling. And the nice thing about BPMN is that it allows you to create business process diagrams that are easy to read and directly executable at the same time. So Camunda supports BPMN 2.0 in a very consistent way. So this is like where we come from. Then we have a new standard from the same organization, also from OMG, which is called CMMN, and this is all about cases. So while BPMN is about structured work and structured workflows, CMMN is about less predictable work. Things that might, happen during your business process that you have to handle in one way or the other. So by supporting those two standards, we allow you to cover more or less any flavors that you may encounter when looking at business processes. Secondly, Camunda is, as I already indicated, all about developer friendliness. It's about allowing your existing developers to just add it to your technology stack and use the know-how they already have about software development to create business process applications. And as a rule of thumb, we often say, if you don't have any Java developers within your organization, it's probably not a good idea to look at Camunda, so you should look somewhere else. But if you do have Java developers, Camunda should actually be your first choice. That's our ambition, at least. This goes hand in hand with the fact that Camunda is available open source. So if you want to be really developer friendly, you also have to provide the source code, obviously. Right. So I would like to demo Camunda BPM now to give you a profound impression of the feature set and the whole architecture, etc. And I would like to do that by looking at the BPM cycle, as we call it. So this is, it's not really invented by us. So it's a typical cycle that consists of I want to design business processes. I want to implement them, obviously. So this is typically project work. And once this has been completed, I need to operate. I want to run those business processes. And maybe during operations, I actually experience weaknesses or problems around my processes, which I have to analyze in order to improve them even further. So the typical iterative approach of continuous improvement. And when looking at the Camunda BPM tools that we provide out of the box, it makes sense to look at them in conjunction to the steps within the BPM cycle. So let's have a look at the right-hand side first. What can we do about process design when using Camunda? There's basically three different approaches available. You can see here on the bottom, on the right-hand side, a tool called Eclipse Modeler. So obviously for you who know Eclipse as a development environment, this is about a BPMN plugin provided as part of Eclipse so that any Java developers can easily create and edit BPM BPMN diagrams. You may challenge that if you're not a developer, of course, because you may say, well, Eclipse is not the kind of environment that I'm used to work with and that I like or want to use every day. However, there's actually a standalone version of this modeler that would actually be, so easy and stripped down to use that you wouldn't even recognize Eclipse. So this is one approach to handle this if you're from the business side and want to design business processes. There is a second approach, which is called BPMN.io, which I'm also going to demonstrate. So this is a BPMN modeler that runs in the browser. So it's very easy to use. It's very business friendly. It's of course able to being integrated with our execution environment, and it's also open source. The only caveat is that it's not already totally feature complete. So I just want to point that out. So when you look at it, there are, I think, lanes and boundary events still missing. So we're still working on this. However, you can expect it to be complete by the end of July this year. So this is, of course, a nice alternative if you want to involve your business side. A third approach is about already existing third-party modelers that you may have within your organization. So there are certain products called, for instance, Signavio or Aris or Evo Prometheus or others. And maybe you already have those products. Maybe your business departments are already used to using those products and they want to continue using them, even when they create to-be processes that should be executed within Camunda or by Camunda. So if you have that situation, you may want to look at Cycle, which is a tool that allows you to integrate those modelers with your execution or development environment. So those three approaches are basically available during design time. And of course, when it comes to the technical implementation, it's very handy that we have that Eclipse-based plugin, because your developers will like to have it in one space where they can handle the BPMN diagrams as well as the Java code and other artifacts. Once we're in production and we actually operate the processes, there's a number of more tools available that are quite helpful here. One is called Cockpit. Cockpit is all about operations. So this may be technical operation, but it could also be, operations conducted by the business department itself. We will look at that. We will look at that in a minute in detail. There's another tool called Tasklist. Tasklist is, as you can imagine, an out-of-the-box task list, which means that your employees or your coworkers can work on the tasks that have been assigned to them, complete them, edit data, look at data, etc. So this is about involving your everyday subject matter experts in the different departments. One interesting fact is that Tasklist is just the out-of-the-box solution that we provide that is quite attractive, but maybe you want to, embed the task management within your already existing or to be created custom applications. And this is quite often the case actually when looking at our customers, because you want to provide a seamless user experience to your coworkers. You have certain individual requirements that you need to reflect. So what you can always do, you can always create your own custom application that embeds a task list and talks to the Camunda backend. The fourth tool here on the left-hand side is admin, and admin is all about, or especially about authorizations. So, granting certain permissions or denying them to make sure that not everyone in your organization is allowed to do everything. All right, so let's have a look at that live demo. So I will just, walk through the cycle. I will create BPMN diagrams. I will just quickly show how you can implement the applications. I won't spend too much time here because this is not a technical webinar. And then I'm going to have a look at the tools, how you can actually operate Camunda, etc., and say a few words about how you can actually use Cockpit to measure KPI and support your process analysis step. Okay, it's demo time. Let's share my screen. There we go. All right, so I think I should start with the Eclipse modeler. So just very quickly, this is my typical Eclipse environment, and what I can always do is I can just say new file and create a new, like in here. Oh, sorry, not new file. New BPMN diagram, of course. So let's say this is an example process. So now I'm able to create BPMN diagrams in here. This is no rocket science, obviously. I just want to demonstrate that it's usable, basically. And of course, also that it's embedded in my development environment. So as a developer, I do appreciate that, of course. As already mentioned, you can also just get this BPMN modeler like a standalone tool. So you can just point your browser to camunda.org and have a look at the download section, and there's a BPMN2O modeler tab. And there we have, for instance, the standalone BPMN2O modeler. You can just download that. And then you will get a BPMN modeler that is technically based on Eclipse, but it doesn't look like a development environment, which may be more attractive if you're not a developer yourself. Right, so that's one approach. Second approach would be to use the BPMN.io project that I already mentioned. So you can find this at bpmn.io, obviously. And what you can do, for instance, is you can just try it out here in the online demo. So I can, for instance, just create a BPMN diagram. This just works directly in my browser, obviously. And I would say it's even nicer to use for business users. And there are certain nice features at hand that make life easier, like this here, for instance. You can just use that or provide that to your business users, obviously. What you can always do is, if you actually want to execute what you're modeling in here, you can just get the BPMN file, and since it's all a standard, it's quite easy to open those BPMN files then in Eclipse and continue working on them. So maybe you want to, change them because you have certain technical matters to reflect. There's all those technical attributes that you would add in order to make this executable and stuff like that. And once you're done, you can, of course, always continue working on this the BPMN.io model as well. So this is well integrated, basically. There's other ways of using BPMN.io. You can, for instance, install it in your Chrome browser so that you have it as a standalone offline editor and other things. Right. So this is about the design part. Let's have a look now at the implementation very quickly. How this basically works is I have these, as I already mentioned, properties that are about execution. So we don't have to look at those in detail right now, but this is how I do it. So for instance, if I'm modeling a so-called service task in BPMN, which is all about executing things automatically, I can link that service task, for instance, to a Java class that would then take over and do it. And once the class has been executed, I can continue on my process. So the important part about this is we seamlessly integrate process automation with typical Java software development, which is, of course, extremely powerful. Right, so let's just assume that I have created a business process using BPMN.io and or the Eclipse editor and actually deployed it to Camunda. So the example I'm going to demo is about invoices. It's very, very simple, actually. So let's assume we have incoming invoices that should be, approved and paid if they're okay. So we have that first step here, a so-called user task, which is all about assigning the appropriate approver. So someone has to figure out who should actually look at that invoice and assign that person to that particular process instance. And that person will then have a look at the invoice and will decide whether it's okay or not. If it's not okay, we have the typical correction loop here, which is about clarification in this situation. And if it is okay, we have to pay the invoice, obviously, and then we're going to archive it by calling some kind of archive system. All right, so it's mostly human workflow management and a little bit of service orchestration at the end. Right, so I've already implemented this, so this is now available. I can use it. So let's just try it out. So I can have a look at the so-called task list first. And I'm right now signed up as the demo user. So I have a user which is called demo, and that user has his personal task list with certain tasks that are assigned to that user. So here in the middle column, we have the tasks that are currently assigned to myself. As you can see, there are certain information provided, like for instance, when that task has been created, there's a due date, so I'm supposed to work on that task and it should be completed by then. There's certain information about that particular invoice already displayed as a preview, things like that. I can of course sort my tasks by different criteria. I can look for certain tasks, things like that. Just on as a side note, this is all in English right now here, but of course the task is multilingual, so you can also use it in other languages, basically. Right, so one interesting thing is here on the left-hand side, on the left column, we have certain so-called filters. So right now I can just see my tasks that are assigned to myself. Here I could see all tasks that are assigned to a certain group I belong to, if there were any. I can even have a look at tasks that have been assigned to my coworkers and look at tasks, at all tasks, basically. So obviously, this is not something that I want always, to be accessible by all users. So this is why those filters can actually be customized. And a quite common behavior is that, a typical, like a normal coworker wouldn't have access to that filter creation and customization feature. This would be done by an administrator with a coding authorization, and then the coworkers can just consume those filters. So just one example, let's say I want to have a filter that shows me all my tasks that are already overdue, that I should have been working on already. I can do that by creating a new filter, saying, I don't know, overdue, exclamation mark. This should be an exclamation mark. And we can even assign a certain color, which is my personal favorite feature, and then define certain criteria, which may be, for instance, that this task should be assigned to the current user that is currently logged in. Yeah, as you can guess, this would be done by an administrator, of course. And let's say all tasks that are already overdue. So like this, for instance. Okay, there we go. And we have exactly one task right now that is assigned to myself and I should have been working on about a day ago. Okay, right. So let's look at one of those tasks now in particular. So we have that task assign approver, for instance. So this is, as I already told, a step within that invoice process, which is about figuring out who should actually approve that invoice. So as you can see here, we can always see as someone who's working on that task where we're currently pending in the process. So I get context information, which is of course helpful. I could do certain things like, for instance, comment on that task. So I could say, I don't know. Well, I'm not sure. So this would be then, logged in the history for that task, which would also be logged, would be the case if I would actually reassign that. So if I would say, I don't want to do this myself, I want to reassign this task to a coworker, like to John, for instance. So now John would find that task here and would be supposed to work on that. Let's just assign it back to demo. Okay, there we go. Now it's my personal task list again. And I could actually complete that task now. So I could say, okay, the approver for this should be myself, maybe. So I will now complete this task. And the nice feature is that I don't have to look for, the follow-up task now in my task list, because since it has been assigned to myself again, it's offered here on the right-hand side. So I can just continue working on this right away. And obviously we're now on the next step, which is about approval. So let's say I do not approve. So there's certain more features like this here, for instance, but I think it's not necessary to look at all the features now. I think you get the basic idea what this is all about. So let's say I do not approve this invoice. It should be reviewed or clarified. So I will not check this here. I will hit the complete button, and now it's to be reviewed, obviously. And now makes sense to look at the operation side of things. So I will now put on another hat. I'm now someone who's in charge of operating the business processes. So I'm working with another tool which is called Cockpit. So Cockpit is all about monitoring, seeing what's going on. And as we can see here, right now we have only one process currently deployed. There are 7 invoices currently being processed, and it's all green, so there are no technical exceptions, errors, or business incidents that would change this traffic light indicator. I could always, search for certain processes, etc., which doesn't make too much sense now with just one process definition being deployed. But these are things that are available on the dashboard. Now I can see that in my process invoice process, there are those 7 invoices currently being processed, and they're at certain stages. So, for instance, one invoice is currently under review. Obviously, the one that I've just been working on. So what I could do is also filter. I could look for certain process instances by certain criteria, etc. But that's not what I'm going to demo right now. So what I would like to do is I would like to look at this particular process instance and see what happened so far. So I can have a look at the history now, and I can see, okay, we kicked off this process instance about a while ago. So I think it was today, but earlier today. And then we worked on that, and we did this and that, and someone has actually completed this task. And now we're currently pending here, obviously. All right. So we could have a look at the payload, at the variables of this invoice. We could actually change those variables if we would have the authorization, etc. So this is all possible. We could also, for instance, cancel this process instance. We could retry it if there were any exceptions. We could add new variables. So lots of things we can do here. And one very interesting feature, it's the only one I want to demo right now, is what if we say, okay, actually, this process is now, in the review, pending in the review task, but we just want to, move it. So we for some reason, we're convinced that the invoice is actually okay. So we can just pay it. So it was a mistake to say that it should be reviewed. Of course, we could just, go through this loop here and approve it again. But maybe we don't want to do this for whatever reason. One thing that we can do here in Cockpit, just to give you one idea, we can actually move the token, so to speak, in BPMN specification language. So we can just say, let's move this from review invoice over to prepare bank transfer. So what I'm doing now is I'm actually changing this like on the fly, and I will just confirm, because as you can imagine, I have to confirm this specifically since it's a pretty tough thing to do. And now it's just over there. So I'm looking at the task list, and let's just refresh this. We see, okay, it's not here anymore. And we're looking at all tasks. There should be some, exactly, prepare bank transfer task now. So when looking at the history, what happened, we can see that first we went up here, and then this orange indicator says that this task has been canceled, and this one here has been, it has been moved over there, basically. So as you can imagine, this is an extremely powerful, also kind of dangerous feature, which is why it's so important to have authorizations at hand. So we have that tool called admin, which allows you to create, very, fine-grained authorizations like permissions for certain, users or groups that may be granted or denied, that may be about certain actions. So for instance, when it's about process definitions, we can say, I don't know, a certain group should be allowed to read or read all process instances of, let's say, the invoice process, for example. So this allows us to really, flexibly define who in our organization should be allowed to see or do specific things. This is what authorizations are all about. All right. So I think that's basically the last thing I wanted to live demo, or at least I wanted to mention, is you may wonder why this dashboard here in Cockpit is, kind of naked in a way. So there's not much to see here. So what's the reason for this? This is just the default situation of Cockpit. Actually, Cockpit is, based on a very flexible plugin architecture. So you can actually add any kind of plugins to any, page within Cockpit to meet your specific requirements. You can even create your very own plugins. There's even a, kind of, marketplace for plugins. So when looking at camunda.org/plugins, you will find different plugins that have been created by members in the community or our customers. So for instance, the patent office in Switzerland created a plugin that you can just reuse now, reuse now. You can just, add it to your specific version of Cockpit. There's plugins about, KPI reporting, like business activity monitoring. My personal favorite plugin is this one here, created by a company called Opitz Consulting, which is about a heat map that shows you, in a visual way, certain bottlenecks within your process, because it shows which parts of your process have been executed most often. So this is all about, meeting your very individual requirements with plugins. And the very same concept is also available for Tasklist. So you can also create your very specific plugins for your end user interface, for your coworkers. All right, so that should be it for now. Of course, there's much more to say and to show about the feature set, but this is just a first general overview, so it doesn't make sense to look too much into the details right now. Let's have a look at the context a bit more. Okay, so you should see my slide deck. And now we can have a quick look at the technical architecture. So this is, beware, it's textile, but it's really just a quick overview. So what is important here? Under the hood, we have that engine running, executing BPMN and CMMN. Obviously, that engine is accessible using the Java or the REST API. So this means that, for example, the applications, the tools I've just demonstrated, they are all based on the REST API. But of course, your very own custom applications can make use of the very same REST API as well. Or alternatively, they can use the Java API. For instance, if you have a user interface based on Java server faces, you may want to use the Java API and leverage the existing integrations for Java EE or Spring and CDI, etc. So that's all attend, and it, of course, accelerates your development. On the left-hand side, we have, as already demonstrated, the Eclipse modeler. We have that cycle tool that I did not demonstrate right now because this is like a very special use case if you already have one of those third-party modelers. And the BPMN files are stored in any kind of file repository, just as part of your development project. So this may be your local file system, but it could also be your subversion or Git or whatever kind of repository. And on the runtime side, on the right-hand side again, we have, of course, this whole thing running inside any kind of runtime container. And this is actually a unique selling point about Camunda. So you probably already have some kind of technical, IT infrastructure or landscape within your organization. So we're actually able to support that. So for example, when looking at the database, you don't have to install a Camunda specific database. So the people running your operations will probably be thankful for that, especially if you have a more, like conservative organization, such like insurance companies or banks. So we support Oracle database, IBM DB2, Microsoft SQL Server, MySQL, MariaDB, PostgreSQL, and H2. We also support different runtime containers, such as Tomcat, JBoss, Glassfish, and the IBM and Oracle stacks. So long story short, this is one big strength of Camunda, that it's really embeddable within your existing IT infrastructure. And as I already mentioned, it's important that all those features that what you can do with Camunda are, of course, implemented in the core engine, then exposed via the Java API, layered on top of the Java APIs, the REST API. And the REST API, again, is the source for our own web applications here on the left-hand side. So everything that we can do in Cockpit and Tasklist, you can also do in your very own application that may talk to our REST API or to the Java API. You can even reuse certain components that we created for our own web applications. So if you create any kind of user interface, with JavaScript, HTML and JavaScript, you may want to use our JavaScript Forms SDK, or you may want to embed BPMN.io in order to display BPMN diagrams or allow your users to even edit those diagrams inside your own user interface. So this is also possible. Right. So much about the technical architecture. very high level overview. So when looking at the enterprise edition, which is of course how we make money basically, what's the main difference if you compare it to the open source edition? On a feature level, not much actually. So the most of Camunda is completely open source. The only difference is when you want to run Camunda inside your IBM or Oracle application service, you would need to download a distribution that is only available for enterprise edition customers. Also, there are certain really nice features for Cockpit that are not available open source. However, it's really add-ons. So you can basically use, of course, Camunda completely open source. This makes especially sense if you want to, evaluate it in detail, if you want to investigate it, if you want to run a prototype or pilot or whatever kind of thing. Even if you want to run it in production, but for not so mission critical processes, it's all fine if you go for open source. If you go for, if you want to run Camunda for your very core business processes, which most of our customers do, of course, it makes sense to look at the enterprise edition because especially the support is, as you can imagine, comes in quite handy if you have any troubles or questions or bugs that you may encounter. So you have SLA based support available with up to 24/7 availabilities, which is of course quite handy. Which is also nice is that as consultants, we are able to help you with best practices on a technical level as well as on a methodological level, like how to apply the BPMN standard, how to create BPMN diagrams that are easy to read and executable, things like that. Right. So let's have a look at the roadmap very quickly. The next release, 7.3, will come out actually next week already. And as you can see here, we release more or less every 6 months. So this allows us to iterate a lot and to consider any feedback, suggestions, etc. that we get from the market or the community. And when looking at what's coming up, what's around the corner with a 7.4 release, which is scheduled for end of November this year, this is about decisions. So you may have heard of a standard called DMN, which stands for Decision Model and Notation. This is a very interesting addition to our stack, actually, because it allows you to, support business rules in a better way than it was available in the past. So this is about creating decision tables that are, again, easy to read and may even be changed or maintained by the business side, and automate those directly within Camunda, seamlessly integrated with cases as well as BPMN workflows. So next release of Camunda for end of this year will be all about DMN, which will allow you also to become way more agile during operations. So it allows you to actually, as I said, change decision tables like on the fly at runtime. Of course, with the appropriate authorizations and restrictions, versioning, etc. So this is of course not, it's not a you shouldn't take this lightly, obviously. And this is what you can expect here. Plus, you can expect more improvements on BPMN.io on the modeling side of things. So those two aspects, decisions and modeling, will be influencing the next release or guiding it or driving it, that you can expect end of November this year. All right, let's have a quick look at customers or real-world examples of how you can actually use Camunda BPM. So this is for instance, a real-world example. It's it's a process that is actually in production at a bank. It's about credit card applications, and as you can see here, it's of course quite complex. As you can imagine, there are quite some steps that need to be undertaken before you actually get a credit card as a customer. But it's actually the source code, what you can see here. So right in the middle, we have the pool that is executed by the process engine, and this is what's really happening in real time. This is not documentation or whatever. This is a real-time view on the source code that is executed every day. And as you can see here, we have manual steps as well as automated service calls. So the blue ones are user interactions. The orange ones, just some examples here, are about service calls. And as you can see on the left-hand side, when a client asks for a credit card at that bank, one approaches or one access is calling them. So they have a call center working with a portal. And those call center agents then will trigger that process. Oh, just a second, please. Sorry. And therefore kick off the business process by just entering data in their portal that is integrated with the Camunda BPM stack. And then we will check the existing master data. So we'll look, if we already have that customer in our database, etc. Then we will check the credit worthiness. So in Germany, for instance, there are certain institutions that provide us information that we can actually access, like calling web services automatically. And based on those information, we may have to look at the credit worthiness. We may have to actually approve the credit card manually, especially if there are certain limits that would be exceeded. And if everything is fine, we will, create those new master data about that credit card in our backend systems by calling them using, service calls, API calls. We will trigger the real credit card issue process at a third-party provider using their exposed web services, and and we're good. So that's a typical end-to-end process running at that bank, for instance. When looking at our customers in general, as you can imagine, most of them are from the German-speaking area, since that's where we come from. But we get more and more traction in especially the United States. So there's customers like the financial industry, regulatory authority, but also software vendors such as iTrade Network or Spotter Systems, and also customers in Canada. So here on the right-hand side is a public institution. We're not allowed to put their logo on our website, but they're available for reference calls if you're interested in that. Then when looking at the European area, we have mostly banks and insurance companies working with Camunda. We also have more and more telco providers, which is quite interesting. So T-Mobile Austria, for instance, doing order execution. We have Lufthansa Technik, the airline. We have Zalando, which is the German version of Zappos, executing each and every order in Camunda. So this is like millions of orders being executed. And in the APAC area, we have, for instance, Allianz, the Allianz branch in Indonesia. We have a pretty big Australian public institution also available for reference contacts if interested. And you may have never heard of Mobicom. Sorry, but Mobicom is actually the biggest mobile communications provider in Mongolia. So there are quite some interesting companies all over the world using Camunda now. And what's also interesting is almost, I would say 80%, maybe even 90% of them use Camunda for their very core business processes. It's not about the holiday request or things like that. It's about their real core business being automated with Camunda. And this directly correlates to the whole, framework-like approach. So, you couldn't actually do this with a totally model-driven BPM suite because you wouldn't be able to, meet the individual requirements, and you would need too much vendor-specific know-how, and you would depend too much on the vendor. So that's something that we observe again and again when Camunda is being evaluated. It's being used for that core business processes. Just two case studies. One is about the Swiss Patent Office. So they are obviously processing all trademark and patent applications in Switzerland. They had the problem that they had some kind of proprietary business process execution that was very bad in terms of business IT alignment. They didn't really know what was going on at one time. Whenever they wanted to change the processes, it was a quite costly and development project, basically. So that was their challenge. They looked at different BPM products. I think we actually wrote down which exactly, so you can just have a look at the white paper that is available in the network and look that up. And they looked at different products and decided to go for Camunda, mostly for three reasons: because of the BPMN 2.0 coverage, because it's, as I already mentioned, a developer-friendly approach. It's not about zero-code BPM, which wouldn't work anyway, and it's about being embedded in their existing IT landscape. And that was a huge project, as you can imagine. They're in production since last summer, I think. And they have automated more than 100 business processes within their core business cluster, executing 150,000 process instances per month, involving 250 users. And the main benefit is now that they have that real-time transparency in development as well as in runtime. They have a way higher quality of results when actually executing business processes or changing things in their processes, and they're way more effective during runtime in terms of monitoring and operations. The next case study is from as I already mentioned, Allianz Life Indonesia. So you probably know the Allianz insurance company from Munich, Germany, and they have a branch in Indonesia, which is quite big actually. So they have 2 million customers and 14,000 insurance brokers, being part of their organization. So they had the problem of workflows being hard-coded, quite similar maybe to the patent office, and the typical problems resulting out of that that were about misunderstandings, confusion, no real process modeling that would support their communication between business and IT. So they looked at different products again, and they decided to go for Camunda because of the roadmap and the basic vision that we have. They also tried out our product support and found that very convincing, as well as the consulting they got from us about how to apply the BPMN standard and of course technical architectures. So they were one of our first customers, and they're in production now for almost 3 years, 2.5 maybe. Automated 40 business processes, executing 160,000 process instances per month, and those processes are, I think, completely automated. So this is not so much about user interaction like with the patent office. This is more about fully automated straight-through processing, which means they had the challenge of integrating already existing legacy applications, which they did successfully. So all major systems have been integrated, which also means that all new projects now almost always involve Camunda as a middleware, which is obviously an indication that this worked out. What we're also particularly proud of is that they really love our support. So they say, they testify that we actually deliver the best support they get from all their software suppliers, which of course is very nice to hear. All right, so that's too much about Camunda for now. So what can you do now? I mean, there's loads of sources on the web to look up. You can just download it. You can read the tutorials. They're getting started experiences, screencasts, and stuff available. So but one thing that I would like to recommend or to point out is actually doing a proof of concept. And this is of course not new, but I would say we have a certain concept of proof of concept which is quite helpful, because it involves the business as well as development. So this means just one blueprint here. A typical 5 days workshop would consist of initial 2 days, bringing together the business side, the business departments or representatives from the business, as well as IT developers and architects, looking at the BPMN standard, like a little crash course, doing this directly based on processes from your organization. So this is like learning on the fly. And actually creating a potential to-be business process in BPMN together. Once that has been achieved, this typically takes about 1 to 2 days, and then we can actually implement that, of course, as a prototype. But during those following 2.5 days, we can, look at all the technical questions that you might have. So your developers can actually, shoot all their questions, concerns, challenges about how to integrate their legacy systems or how to scale under, if you have high load situations, how to actually, involve your existing user interface layer or create new user interfaces that the end users would like, and all those aspects. And on the last day, we actually demo what we have achieved together. So it's not us building it, it's you building it, being coached by us, which is a huge difference in order to really evaluate that technology and figure out whether it's the right choice. And so then we can actually have a look at that. We can discuss the lessons learned. You can actually say whether this approach would work for you, where you'll see the benefits, where you'll see the challenges, and basically make a business case based on that. That's what typically works out quite well, even if you don't go for Camunda afterwards, even if you just want to learn about best practices around process modeling and automation. Even if you go for the open source edition and don't purchase the enterprise edition, of course, this is very helpful, and we're happy to do it. All right, so yeah, that's it for now. So I think we have at least a few minutes for questions. So I've been looking here at the chat window, and there were a few questions trickling in during this session. Just a second, please. So yeah, one question is, as I expected in a way, of course, about how to involve those existing applications. So this one is about how to actually integrate with already existing systems, such as SAP, for instance. So especially when it's about how to involve the users. So yeah. All right. So the thing is, there's basically two approaches. One is push and one is pull. So what you can do is you can pull from SAP, for instance, or other systems by calling the Camunda, for example, REST API, and ask for pending tasks for a specific user. And then you will get those tasks, and you can display those tasks inside your existing system. And once that task has been completed, you can then call the Camunda API again and say, okay, this task has been now completed with these data or payload. Please go ahead. This is more like, the pull mechanism in terms of pulling the tasks from Camunda into your system. Other way around would be the push mechanism, which means Camunda would actually actively call your system, which is also possible. So you would have a user task, and when the token, so to speak, arrives at the user task, you can implement a logic that would actually call your existing system, say using the existing exposed API, saying, okay, there has been a new task created. Please, make your user work on that. So please notice that and go ahead and call us back when the task has been completed by the user. So both approaches are quite common, actually, if you have some kind of existing user interface. Any more questions? Yeah. It's a bit more complicated to model application flows as well. BPMN or only. Okay, got it. Okay, I just had to read it a couple of times. So, right. Okay, so model application flows. So this is a good question. So let me just read it literally. Do I model application flows as well with BPMN 2.0 or only real workflows which have no parameters, no individuality in workflow? I'm not totally sure if I understand the question correctly, but the thing is, of course, there are certain, things that may happen within an application that you wouldn't consider a business process. So this could, for instance, be screen flows. You have a certain series or sequence of screens that should be displayed to the user. And from an architectural point of view, you typically don't model that in BPMN or run it in a BPMN process engine because it's really just about the screen flow. You wouldn't have any specific wait states in terms of asynchronous continuation, as we say on the technical side. Long story short, it's a bit overkill to use a process engine to actually control a screen flow. So we typically recommend to decouple that and have a screen flow engine. There are plenty out there. However, of course, we do have customers who did it. So who actually, modeled their screen flow as a BPMN diagram and then executed that. So you can do that. There are certain advantages or benefits, but it's not necessarily a common practice, at least. But to answer the second half of the question, of course, workflows modeled in BPMN 2.0 do have parameters, do have data that they work on, that they process, and that may route, of course, the process instance. Okay, so that's a follow-up question to what I've just said. So yeah, sure. I mean, if you have a real user task being created in between a screen flow, then of course it makes sense to talk to the process engine again. And this is actually quite common. So there's a certain pattern that we call, or that is called the UI. What is it called? intermediate UI mediator pattern, I think. You can look it up on our website, so in the tutorial section. So this actually makes sense, of course. Let's assume you have a screencast, so a screen flow, and at a certain step in that screen flow, there should be a explicit user task being assigned to another user who should then continue working on that. That's, of course, the point at latest where you would talk to the process engine. And of course, it may be just the case under certain circumstances. So, of course, in those situations as well, it makes sense to talk to the engine and let the engine figure out whether you can actually display the follow-up screen right away, or whether you actually have to, assign it as a user task to another user. So that's, of course, also possible. Okay, another question on the commercial side of things. This is about the proof of concept workshop I just mentioned. So someone asking whether that would be free of charge. Unfortunately not. So the reason is, I know that some big vendors do it actually free of charge, which is, I find that actually suspicious, because it means they will get that money back sooner or later because of their pricing model. We are a quite small company, as you already know, and we also want you to get something out of these workshops, even if you don't purchase an enterprise edition. So this is why we say we can help you, even if you plan to use the open source edition only, and therefore, of course, we also have to invoice you afterwards. So, but I think it's a pretty good ratio in terms of what you get out of that. All right, so time's up. I would suggest that, I would like to thank you for your time and interest, and suggest that you just reach out to us. If you have any further questions, you can just, shoot us an email or call us, or fill out one of those contact forms on Camunda.com. You can download on Camunda.org the open source product. You can apply for a trial edition of the enterprise edition on Camunda.com. So there are plenty of ways to get in touch with us. And it would be great to speak to you later on, or see you one day, maybe even. Thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the day. Bye-bye. Before you wonder, we will send out the recording probably tomorrow, because here in Germany it's already 6 p.m. and the people taking care of that are already at home, I suppose. So you will get the recording, the follow-up email first thing tomorrow. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.